The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the global economy was a huge topic of discussion at the G20 summit. And because of the pandemic, world leaders were forced to meet virtually to discuss the issues and the economic damage facing their countries. Gita Gopinath, chief economist at the International Monetary Fund, is with us now to talk about what happened at this week's summit and the future of the economy. Thanks so much for being with us. So the managing director of the IMF wrote in her note ahead of the G20 that it's imperative for an effective vaccine to become available. She said if it's delayed and social distancing has to continue, quote, growth will be lower, public debt will be higher, and the scars on the long-term potential of the economy more severe. Can you expand on that and talk about what the economic consequences would be if we don't get the virus under control?
Hello, yes. We estimate that if there isn't widespread availability, or if you can actually make available on a universal scale the vaccines, treatments, and tests that will end this health crisis everywhere, you would add $9 trillion to the global economy between now and 2025. So that's a big boost to the global economy, and that number is just substantial and in comparison to the cost of doing that kind of deployment. So it's very important to make widespread universal availability of any solution to this health crisis, be it vaccines, treatments, or tests.
So the head of the IMF also called for the G20 countries to implement a framework in order to help the world's poorest countries achieve permanent debt relief. But she also said that other countries need help as well. It's not just the poorest, and even, you know, there's a lot of need in a lot of the developed nations as a result of this pandemic. Can you tell us just what this plan entails and the impact that it would have on the global economy?
So firstly, on the piece about low-income countries, so there was the debt service suspension initiative, which was about providing a moratorium on payments, debt service payments to G20 countries. But all that does is postpone the amount that they have to pay. Now, that's been extended by another 6 months, or so a total of a year. But what's really important is that for some of these economies, you just absolutely need debt to be restructured. You need much serious debt forgiveness. And this is why it's very essential for countries to work together to provide debt relief, to restructure debt for some of these countries. And the common framework that the G20 recently endorsed is a very big step in that direction, because you're bringing together Paris Club members, non-Paris Club members, the private sector, all of them putting all the creditors on a level playing field to provide that kind of debt relief. Now, of course, the most important next step is implementation and making sure that this common framework gets implemented. The other point, indeed, is that this, at the current stage, this only covers low-income countries. And so there are emerging markets, there are some emerging markets who will also need this kind of debt relief. And so it's important to extend the framework also to them. But this common framework is a very important first step.
So, Gita, as you know, last month the IMF forecast that the global economy would take a historic hit this year, falling 4.4%, but it also expects a partial recovery with global growth of about 5.2% for next year. Explain to our audience what these numbers mean and how they'll affect just regular folks around the world.
So this crisis has had a big impact on global economic activity, but it hasn't actually been as bad as some of us were worried about. So at minus 4.4%, that is a big hit to global economic activity. But at the same time, we've seen stronger recoveries around the world. The third quarter of this year, we've seen many parts of the world actually surprise on the upside. So right now, when I step back and think about the forecast going forward, there are two main forces. One is, of course, on the vaccine front, which is you've seen much better news. We've seen positive news on that front. But before you get there and you have enough of those vaccines deployed and made available to end this health crisis durably, you have the winter that you have to go through. And you're seeing record rises in the number of cases. So what that has meant is a loss in momentum in countries in the fourth quarter. which is why it's hugely important for governments to not to prematurely withdraw their support, their fiscal support particularly, and to plan for the recovery, which will be one where you will have low-skilled workers more likely out of jobs than high-skilled workers, labor force participation being lower than what it was before the crisis. So there's a lot more that still needs to be done. And we are in this delicate kind of uncertain phase, but with the positive that we might be coming out of it in 2021 in terms of the health crisis.
So in a video address, President Trump defended pulling the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accord, a deal that now President-elect Joe Biden plans to re-enter. I want to play a little of that sound for you.
The Paris Accord was not designed to save the environment. It was designed to kill the American economy. I refuse to surrender millions of American jobs and send trillions of American dollars to the world's worst polluters and environmental offenders. And that's what would have happened.
So I want to ask you, why do you think it's important, or do you think it's important for the U.S. to be part of the Paris climate deal?
I would make a bigger claim, which is that a lot more needs to be done to ensure the world is on a sustainable path in terms of ensuring that the increase in temperatures stay within the limits that are required to prevent catastrophic risk from climate change. We're already seeing, disasters that are coming from an overheating planet, but we have to do a lot more in getting there in terms of mitigating the problem. And so we recently put out a prescription which involves a three-pronged approach to addressing climate mitigation. And the first step is to do a green stimulus, a green fiscal stimulus, which includes green public investment. A second step is to put in carbon prices in an increasing graduated scale over time, predictable scale over time. And third, to make sure that they compensate low-income households so that this particular policy doesn't become regressive. Now, what we find is such a package, when well done, can deliver both in terms of increasing jobs and increasing growth and strengthening the recovery out of this crisis over the next decade, while at the same time putting the planet on a much more sustainable path. So we think we can actually get both with a well-done climate package.
Gita Gopinath, thank you so much for joining us. I think it's a good reminder to people, because there's a lot of focus on the health implications of the pandemic, which are valid, but we are also going to have to deal with another pandemic within the health one, which is the economic pandemic that has the possibility of having a domino effect right across the globe, already is. So it's really good to talk to you to give us a little bit of clarity. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.